Dr. Zachary Paikin joins me live on the broadcast. He's an expert on, international order as well as great power relations. If there's one thing that we need to focus most on right now is great power relations, isn't it? The fact that there was a summit between President Putin and Donald Trump, and that summit has now been delayed with no clear idea of when that date is actually going to take place, indicates that as things stand right now, when you talk about the war in Ukraine, there are limited options to end this.
Well, that's true. Any end to the war in Ukraine is going to require a comprehensive settlement and not just a ceasefire, which particularly the Ukrainians and the Europeans have been embracing for the past several months. Russia is not going to agree to an immediate unconditional ceasefire. Because Russia is using its advances on the battlefield as a form of leverage to try to obtain and realize the political goals that it set at the beginning of this war. So it's going to be a difficult balancing act as a result. It's going to require Western actors to engage with Russia's bottom line demands and to try to find ways to reach politically difficult compromises. There's no way around that. And what we've seen so far, unfortunately, from my point of view at least, is that Europe has been embracing the position of there needs to be an immediate ceasefire, in part because they think it's not going to happen. And they know that it's not going to happen because Russia can't agree to it for the reasons that I just mentioned. Okay. They're also, planning in today's Coalition of the Willing meeting, continued plans to deploy combat forces on Ukrainian troops after on Ukrainian soil, after a ceasefire, which again, would transgress one of Russia's red lines. So the goal, from Europe's perspective, it seems to me, is to maintain, a war which they don't like, but which they think is preferable to making serious and difficult political compromises with Russia and playing to Donald Trump's desire for a quick resolution to the war.
You've outlined it very quickly and covered a lot of ground. But the fact is, here is a president who said, I'm going to end this in 24 hours. He met the Russian president in Alaska. First time he called him on American soil in over a decade. 2 months later, or a couple of months later, there is still no end in sight, no solutions, and no way that what America wants or what some of the other G7 countries want, Russia is going to agree to. So many would say that Donald Trump has his back to the wall simply because even the first summit didn't result in anything. And going into the second summit, he said he wants something conclusive, something substantial, and that isn't there.
Yeah, and the president is right to want that. I think that if we have two summits that, if they are perceived to have been failures, I'm not saying that Alaska was a failure, but if there's the perception that two consecutive presidential summits are a failure, that's going to be extremely damaging to the cause of diplomacy. And I think there's really no alternative to a diplomatic comprehensive settlement here. If the purpose of these recent moves we've seen from Donald Trump, the imposition of sanctions on Russia, et cetera, if they're designed simply for the purpose of positioning, to basically convince, the wider audience here that, the United States is not going to give away the farm in forthcoming negotiations. And if it delays the summit to the point where it allows for greater preparation to ensure that this summit is going to be a success, I think it's a positive thing. I think
Do you think a summit is going to happen? Do you think a second summit is going to happen between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin?
Absolutely. I think that there's still very much a possibility it's going to happen. It has not been scheduled yet. It was never scheduled. I think there's both parties right now, both the Americans and the Russians, are not writing off the possibility of a summit. So I think there's every possibility that it will still happen. I think what I'm concerned about is if the Trump administration's pursuit of sanctions here is not for posturing and positioning, but if it's rather...
I was coming to just that with those sanctions being in place... Earlier, President Biden said that he's not going to put sanctions. He put a price cap because, of course, he didn't want inflation to hit his own people so badly. But with these sanctions in play, what are the chances that the Russian president is going to agree to a summit at all?
Yeah, so as I was saying, this is my concern, is that if the Americans think that the imposition of these sanctions is actually going to be a successful form of leverage against the Russians, I think they're mistaken. The Russians have proven very clearly for the past 3.5 years that they are prepared to weather the economic costs of this war, that they will weather sanctions, that they will weather further, military assistance to Ukraine as well, to pursue what they see as their core security interests. And I think the mistake we make is that because this is a war of aggression, we assume that this is a purely elective war war on the part of Russia, when Russia does in fact have security concerns and political goals related to its security concerns that it is pursuing here. So we better make sure that this is not actually just a form of leverage that we're trying to do, because if we do that, then we're going to end up with a situation where these talks are not going to succeed. The risk is, in fact, that this is going to appear to be Trump's war and not just Biden's war, and that's going to make it harder for Trump actually to resolve this war.
I think the summit can happen if President Putin sends a Nobel recommendation letter. I believe that summit is going to take place in 24 hours, even if it results in any ceasefire or not. I'm going to leave it there. Zachary Paikin, thanks so much for speaking to me on India Sense.